Well, Bill,
It's a safe
welcome.
environment.
It's a safe, definitely a
Hi,
safe
Phil.
space.
We have
Bill
Bill
and
and
Phil.
Phil
Oh
today.
yeah. So fun fact is my business partner's name is Will, right? So Will and Phil, and then people kind of oftentimes clients have a good chuckle at that for some reason.
That's great.
We're a little bit interchangeable at times. We complement each other in the right places, but also think the same in also the right places, I would say. That's a good relationship. I'm not gonna get into this more because I know he listens to those. So I'm Phil, partner at Webusoft. We do custom software around edge tech. We started this podcast to essentially have insightful conversations with uh, leadership in oil and gas, for instance, and other industries that are looking at major innovation in the next 5 years. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it.
Could you give me a quick introduction as to what you do and what your relationship with new technologies looks like?
Sure. So I am the CEO of the Persimmon Group. We're a Tulsa-based management and project management company. For 30 plus years, my focus has been in project management, leadership development, executive team development, and strategic planning across industries and sectors. A lot of my team are project managers and work both on site or virtual, running technology projects across the board. My main focus for the past 15 plus years has been working with leadership teams to navigate uncertainty and disruption. So, with the speed of change, uncertainty, change that's coming at them, how do they essentially accept that change is constant, but chaos is a choice? So, how do we kind of smooth that out, get their organizations performing the way they want to, versus sort of feeling like they're hyper reacting or in a fire drill mode over many times?
So when you say chaos is a choice, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean is that if you accept that change is constant, because we are in a place where we aren't in these change cycles of 30 years like we were maybe 20, 30 years ago. We're in a change cycle that's happening in sometimes in years, in months, or in weeks or days.
Mm-hmm.
And so my point about chaos as a choice is that you can choose how you meet this change. For a while, we had some leaders in certain industries who tried to really almost put their head in the ground and deny the change was coming and just stay the same course. Now, what we're seeing is if you accept that change is the constant, it reframes your question, which is how do I build the team, kind of like a sports team, or what I focus a lot on military special operations teams,
Mm.
which is if you accept change is going to come at you, then I change the focus of my discipline and my interactions with my team because I can't know all the answers today. What I want to have a team is that they can adapt to those changes proactively with an open mind, watching for them, and sometimes reactively because we have to based on external conditions or forces. So that's to me is really the art right now in leadership is getting teams that can kind of navigate as they need to through the environment versus just sort of going hair on fire or
Mm.
freezing up or just going into what I see a lot of right now is constant fire drill mode, which is hyper reactivity. And
Right.
that means that you are not being intentional in the direction you're trying to go.
So kind of like expect the unexpected and then why
That's right.
worry over things you can't control? Only focus on things you
Yeah.
can, right? Okay. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I know some people on the team are maybe more in the fire drill. Won't name them, but uh, definitely
Well,
have
a
someone.
lot of sectors, were built by people who were what we call the hero based culture. They were
Hmm.
used to
Yep.
being fire drill managers or fire people. The challenge is that, as we've seen generationally with a lot of succession planning gaps and retirements, is that heroes are awesome until they're no longer there. And if your
Mm.
team was built around a hero based culture, they often don't understand the judgment, the decision making, the actions or responses to solve problems. They were used to somebody else coming in and saving the day. And that's not healthy for the company or any organization in the long term. It's a strategic risk. In the short term, it's great because you get over the hump of this week or this day. And that's what I'm trying to really help focus companies into that sustainable long term. How do you prepare for this so that you aren't yo yoing your
Hmm.
strategy, your customers, or your employees as you go through this?
Hmm. So focus on the vision and stick to the plan, essentially.
Have a very clear flag of where you're trying to get to. Yes, your vision. And so, one of the metaphors that I use and I speak on times is it's the map versus the terrain. And that's a key concept for me. So I do a lot of outdoor backpacking. I'm very active in
I
scouting and
could
things
tell
like
by
that.
that analogy, yes.
Yeah. And so the map is the plan. You got to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, then you're just hoping everybody goes along the right way. But the terrain is my environment, and the terrain changes at times. And so I need to be able to constantly be looking at both and getting good information related from
Hmm.
both. I need a team that can give me insights. What are you seeing out there in the customer base or in the market or on the projects? So I can adjust my map when I need to. But I've got to have both. If I stay rigid with the map, I'm going to fail because the terrain's going to
It's
change
because
on
you
me.
don't react to the day-to-day
That's right.
obstacles.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And if you go to on the other side and say, well, I can't know what the future is going to look like or the terrain, let's just take off and try it. Well, then that doesn't work out either very well either because you aren't thinking about key checkpoints or like when I backpack with kids, where the water is because
Right.
kids without water turn into Lord of the Flies really fast. So in that example, I need the two. And the art as a leader and as a team now is, are you building a team that can read those environments and give you intel so you as a leader can make what you would consider to be informed decisions?
Hmm. Obviously, you said you're CEO, I think, of your group. What takes up most of your day?
So now clients, I have a president who runs the company. And so one of my things, I started my company in 2004.
Hmm.
And I spent the first 20 years of that company just about working almost front lines with all clients as well, while growing a company, while developing it, having a family as well. Um,
That's not easy to
and
do. I'm
it's
in
not,
a similar boat.
it is. And I had three sons going through that. And so where I got to was as my youngest son was moving out of house, graduating high school, I've been working on developing my leadership team to be able to take Persimmon to its next chapter. And what was important for me on that, I've watched and I consult a lot of family-based and founder-based companies. The one thing I wanted to make sure of was I wasn't a founder looking over a shoulder.
Hmm.
And so part of that in that development over several years of my leadership team was to get them prepared to where I'm not checking in on them every day. I'm not going to be the backseat quarterback kind of thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to free myself up to
Hmm.
focus on clients and coaching. So I do a lot of coaching and I do a lot of strategic planning. I advise certain key companies at the more executive or strategic level now. And I also speak globally at different conferences.
You mentioned oil and gas as being one of the industries that you're operating in. Do you have more? And what's your favorite? What's your favorite
Sure.
industry?
So that's a good, great question. Oil and gas is a lot of my work and has been. We've done a lot in IT. I mean, I was actually born and bred through project management, coming up as a business analyst, process
Hmm.
consultant
I
in
saw
the IT
IBM
space.
somewhere. Am I right?
IBM,
Yeah.
MTV, I was AT&T, and then we did, as I started Persimmon, a number of very large technology projects across sectors. I'm heavy in public sector, as was going through a lot of modernization in the late 2000 aughts, if you will. But now my sectors are really broad. So I have public, private, and nonprofit. I will tell you personally, nonprofit's probably one of my favorite because of impact.
Hmm.
But what I really like working with are what I consider mid maturity companies. They're companies who are trying to get to the next level where they want to maintain competitiveness in the marketplace, but they may not have been a bleeding edge or even close to lagging bleeding edge on technologies. And so what they're trying to figure out is how do we navigate everything from AI and automation into also employee retention and
Hmm.
organizational design, and how do we adapt in a changing environment without having to like reorg all the time too. The thing I have found in the last 15 years has especially focused around leadership is what got missed in so many organizations was what I call the fundamentals. We got so papered up, and these aren't bad things, but we got so many procedures and processes and forms and tools. We forgot sometimes how to just engage and align a team and how to play to
Hmm.
people's strength, understand each other. So that's where a lot of my focus now is because I find that when you solve some of the fundamentals, you actually see other problems or symptoms that were the organization was experiencing become released, because it's like the core valve, the root cause areas were being addressed.
So you like to work with, so would say mid maturity. It's like big enough to know what you're doing, but not large enough that you can pivot or essentially make quick business decisions.
Yeah. I want to work with leaders and organizations that truly want to bring change or improvement in how they perform, not the what they do necessarily. That's not my wheelhouse, and to tell you what you're doing is the right product or not. My focus is more about the how you make decisions, how you assess that. I don't honestly want to work with organizations that want sort of just lip service to change, that they say they want it, but they're not really willing to embrace it.
And then they're going to shelf whatever solution you bring to them.
Exactly. Because I feel like that's like pulling the carpet out from under people's legs. When the front lines, I love working in the front lines because that's where everything happens, right? So you're trying to balance between that front line all the way up to top level leadership, both awareness and direction, and ensuring that you are getting that adaptability and awareness, as I mentioned kind of on the terrain a moment ago, from the front lines. So context is very important.
Where do you see, so, obviously you act as a coach and as a, leadership advisor, let's say, for a lot of companies. What do you see coming back the most as a friction point or a waste, essentially? Like, oh, this is a big missed opportunity that kind of all these companies are somehow.
So I'll share with you the number one waste is, and it has been for, at least since I've been asking the question for 15 years, is meetings. Meeting efficiency. So I've asked a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Meetings. So for 15 years, I've asked a question of audiences around the world as I work with clients and also speaking engagements and training and such. Out of on average, 1 hour meeting, how much value do you get out of a 1 hour meeting? So what do you think? What do you think the answer is, Phil?
So how do you measure value? Is it just like
so
how much of that
the individual, versus I'm just sitting twiddling my thumbs, wishing like, why am I in this meeting? Kind of questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would think the overwhelming majority is I'm wasting my time.
Yeah, so it's 5 to 15 minutes of value is what it has been for
there we go.
plus years. And so I my flip back to the question of companies is if you create a product or you produce or you're transporting a product, like I'm saying oil and gas as an example. If I said that you were losing 75%, let's just go with that for 15 minutes, 75% of your product was waste, would you be in business? No. Then why is our time viewed differently, right? And so that's one. I'll tell you the other two really big ones right now that have been going on with leadership teams. First one is decision making. There's a lot of friction around decision making. It's kind of a post-pandemic where prior to the pandemic, it was not one of the top three issues. So what it's really around is kind of two parts now. One is the quality of information going into the decision, and the second is the speed to decision making. And the third one that I get a lot of is around accountability and delegation. So those are organizationally, those are the biggest ones. My fourth one that I'll put as an add-on that I do a lot of also coaching around is burnout and time management.
Oh yeah, well, kind of HR, I guess. Related.
That's everybody. It cuts across all the areas.
Is it? So I have a question about number two that I'll get back to, but on the HR topic, even ourselves, like we're not a huge team, right? We're about 40 on the team, and we're starting to see it more and more, right? Like, and I think it's a bit of a time bomb from COVID, I think, where now mental health is just degraded to the point where, people are burning out over not even necessarily working that hard. It's just, especially the remote people, right? And again, like remote work is great. I love it. I've done it for, 2020 to maybe 2023, almost exclusively. And since then, I've decided to come back to the office because I just felt like every day was kind of Groundhog Day, right? It's the same kind of routine every day. You're not really seeing anybody outside of your own family if you have one, right? And everyone you see is on video calls. Is that what you see also? Is like there's a bit of a...
It is part of it. So the challenges on burnout, and time management is a lot of it is about personal choices. So if I was to take you
Right.
to a place that didn't have cell service and you're going to go with your family for a week and you didn't realize it didn't have cell service, you go out there and you realize, dang, no cell service. I can't check my phone, my email, what have you. It's going to suck for a day. But then you're going to get used to it, and then you're going to decompress. So I love coming to Canada to canoe the Boundary Waters up in the Crownlands.
I thought you were going to say I love coming to Canada because they have no technology infrastructure whatsoever. I can just disconnect.
Well, that's true wilderness. I mean, I was just there this summer. I took a group of scouts for 3 weeks almost, and so you're 2 weeks on the water, right? But my point on that one is that if I then take the same situation with your family, and you're in a place that does have cell service, you have to choose. So one of those, I think, one aspect of it is because we're not making choices as leaders, either in our teams or individually, to set up boundaries. But the bigger one that actually we're seeing is heightening it. Do you feel with where you are today, say, compared to prior to the pandemic, do you feel things just seem busier, almost more like discombobulated a little bit?
I mean, for me specifically, I prefer where I am now than where I was before the pandemic, let's say on a career path, let's call it that. But I see what you mean.
And stuff coming at you.
But I see what you mean. Obviously, everything's moving faster. Dealing with technology, especially on the news feed, for instance, right? News feed has gotten out of control, or there's a new crisis every 30 seconds, right? And half of them are fake AI, right? So just to go back to your point about, disconnecting, I think that's really the key to avoid, and that's like spot on, right? Because I think the people that are burning out, and again, like I'm not, a psychologist or anything like that, just my own theory is they don't know how to prioritize, and they don't know how to process information in a way that it's not overwhelming. I've seen something, some of the things happen with our own employees, especially on the management position, where again they don't set boundaries, right? So they keep getting flooded with questions and information all the time, and they can never turn it off. And so what happens is you just get overwhelmed, and then they panic. They make a rapid decision on something, they make a mistake, and then that just compounds into more and more problems. Whereas all you have to do is turn off your phone and then come back the next business day and then say, well, I wasn't there.
That's right. Well, so younger generations doing a much better job of this, Gen Z especially. We're seeing it globally.
Oh, interesting.
But to your point, so prioritization is one. Intentionality is actually a big one. Do I intend? What do I want to do? What do I intend to do? And there is a third part on that, which is around the dopamine squirt in your brain and distraction. Because we're in a highly distractive environment, and it creates, I don't know if you've seen it takes about 23 minutes to regain focus. Well, you have an entire generation, even younger now, younger millennials, Gen Z, who have been nothing but trained on getting dopamine squirts constantly and distraction. And so the challenge to, like what you were saying, is that if you as an individual say, I'm going to turn my phone off during the witching hour, 5 to 7 o'clock with the kids or the family.
Yep.
There's a lot of bosses and leaders out there. They're like, no, you can't do that. You got to be available 24/7. And these younger generations are starting to push back and saying, no, you don't get me 24/7. And so I would say we've never come to kind of a reconciliation since the advent of the smartphone as well as social media. But the part post-pandemic that we're seeing that's really added a complication is that when we were all in the pandemic and you were either working from home or remote or whatever that was, everybody's pretty consistent. You pretty much knew what it was.
Okay.
Now companies all made different choices. Even departments inside of companies have. So you're trying to now do this sort of decoder ring between internal and if you have external clients or customers. Now you're trying to think, wait, when are they in the office? When are they out? What's their mode of communication? Because we have so many new channels.
Yeah.
It's creating overwhelm in the brain to try to remember who and how do I communicate with this other group. That is more challenging than we've ever seen. It used to be verbal, right? Phone, in person, then meetings, then email. Then email became weaponized with reply alls, then texting, then all of your various channels now, from Teams to Discord to Zoom to What are you using, like GroupMe text? I mean, just working with kids in scouting, I get to see this a lot because you see what they're using and
You
it
see the
changes
new
all
gen,
the
yeah.
time. And that can create a, wait, how does this person want to communicate kind of question in your mind that you didn't have to have that additional step. Kind of like having to remember passwords now, right? We never thought we'd have to remember all these passwords. That's kind of what's overwhelming the brain a bit. And so that creates much more distraction and anxiety of just trying to keep up with all of that.
Right. And just before my next question, just to go back on what you said about, I think one of the blockers that you saw, or at least friction point, was decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is? More so the case now, I guess, than before COVID.
So I'll tell you, there's two aspects on that one too. One is decision making itself, where we've gotten so many people involved in decisions, consensus based, where it's almost become it's slowed the process down because leaders may not want to make the decision themselves, or they want to make sure there's so many inputs coming in, it can lead to analysis paralysis sometimes. But the bigger aspect of why decision making has become such an issue is that as leaders are going through the decision making process, what we're finding right now in companies, and I'm going to use the pandemic again as an example. When the pandemic happened, and I would say that was the first kind of unifying, disruptive part of our society world, probably the most disruptive we've had in 20 or 30 years. Because it cut across everything.
I would agree.
Yeah, we've had recessions. Yeah, we've had some of these, we had '08, but they weren't the same level. It was in your face. Mm-hmm. Everyone had to change
literally on your face. Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. Too. Everybody had changed the way they work overnight, right? I had oil and gas companies calling me saying, we're all desktops. What do we do? How do we get desktops?
Yeah. We use on-premise software. Yeah. There's a story there with us. But
so the challenge on that was an operational reaction.
Yeah.
We were confronted with a problem, pretty unifying, and we could all adjust based on our company's needs, etc. Where we are today with AI, with the geopolitical aspects, with the economic challenges, the supply chain challenges that are going on in the world, leadership teams are having to make choices, strategic choices that could have dramatic negative implications if they're not correct or successful, right? So now they're very cautious about trying to take their steps. That's where we're seeing a lot of challenge in the decision making. We're actually seeing a lot of gaps in leadership teams where companies did not invest in development, from everything from business skill and acumen down to competencies over the first 20 years of this century. And because of that, because they got cheap after 2001 and the recession that followed, what we were finding is they have real major blind spots in their knowledge and ability to lead. And that is creating a challenge where a lot of companies now are saying, look, we don't know all the answers and we're not sure what the steps should be. We're willing to listen. We need help. And that's where I'm seeing a real shift in leadership teams. In that case, from over 20 years ago, leadership teams are like, hey, we got this. Yes, we need to improve, but we got it. And now you're seeing a lot of leadership teams that are saying, we have a general direction we think we want to go, but we aren't saying we have all the answers on how to get there.
So more awareness about the need for perspective, maybe outside perspective.
And cautiousness of going too fast or too far down a path, because the feeling is that people are a little bit shell-shocked of feeling that the paths are going to keep changing on us. And they are. I think they are.
They are, yeah. They are. Like, obviously we operate in AI a lot. And so, like, the reality shifts from week to week. Sometimes a client comes in and says, like, we need this type of software, and so we'll make a proposal for it, and then next week OpenAI comes up with that out of the box, and so very, very difficult to plan unless you're doing something extremely specialized. That's not going to be obviously replaced by one of the mainstream models, for instance, or that's right. Like, that's not even on the radar.
Oh, and that's the big question, like you just said, which is how far do you go down those paths of starting projects versus thinking, okay, if I wait 90 days, is that going to get solved out there, or whatever that may be? It doesn't have to be a project, a product, whatever it may be.
Yeah, the go-to-market has never been faster because you don't have choice. If you work two years on something, it's out of date already. Through your advisory business, like if you ever encountered a major problem, like so you got to, I see you smiling there a little bit, but you start the relationship with a client and you see how did you guys miss this?
From the customer, on the customer side?
On the way they're running their business, it could be
Oh yeah.
from their customer,
So
it
I would
could
say
be
that's almost commonplace for what I do.
yeah.
A lot of that's because I'm a third party. I get to come in
Yeah.
and look from as the outsider, right? So they're all used to the way they're doing their work,
Yeah.
and it can create biases and
Mhm.
sometimes self talk or self positive talk. So that's a lot of what I do is looking at where there are just fundamental breakdowns, and it can be from so many different areas. What I consider that to be is complacency. And the difference between complacency and consistency for me, because all companies or organizations try to be consistent, because
Mhm.
consistency reduces onboarding time, training time, risk, right?
Yep.
But complacency is when you have been consistent doing that process or whatever that thing is for so long, you fail to ask a question in your mind, which is, what might be different this time?
Mm-hmm.
Which means you then just hope it's always going to be like the way it was. Complacency gets uncovered when organizations or economies get disrupted, and that's what happens. And so, yeah, that's most of what I'm focusing on is one, to assess where maybe you are complacent that you can improve, but more importantly, how do you, back to the point about change is constant and chaos is a choice, is how do you build a team that prevents or mitigates that complacent mindset? And that's a learner. What it is it's a learner mindset, right? It's always asking a question. What am I seeing? Is this the same as last time? Is this different? And instead, once you do that, is have consistencies in what I call micro techniques. I actually call them power plays. And they're little techniques, whether it's communication or how we run a meeting or how we lead. Those little techniques become like tools in our tool belt, where what we're focusing on developing our employees on is walking into a situation, assessing it, and figuring out what tools do I need in that moment. The tools are where I get consistent. The judgment and assessment and awareness is what I need to coach, which is honestly the opposite of how most companies have been running for the past 30, 40 years. They thought we could process. When I came as a consultant in the Northeast of U.S. Originally back in the mid-90s, the quote that they used to give us was, design a process so a monkey can do it. And what's become very clear is that people are not monkeys. And so instead we should have been focusing on judgment like we do as parents, right? Teaching our kids.
Yeah.
We should have been focusing on those things, asking more questions versus saying, just follow process X or process Y.
Yeah, just make it as simple as possible.
Sometimes that process doesn't apply when the terrain changes.
So every company gets complacent, right? I mean, at one point, because so they see something that works, they'll just, okay, on to the next challenge.
They're going to run it as long as they can. That's right. Hey, this is a good thing, because that's where you make your margins too.
Yeah. What you're saying is obviously there's always room for optimization, but when complacency now is becoming a major issue in your business, then that's a problem. So almost like compliance, where compliance most of the time is not really a problem until it becomes one where now it's too late.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why the sports teams in the military are two really good examples, because if you're a sports team and you're predictable because you're complacent.
Yeah, you've been winning mostly, you get to the finals.
Everybody knows what plays you're going to run, how you're going to come at them. Exactly. So the key is, like you said, a lot of your organization thrives on stability, but you've got to still have that mindset that says, what might be different this time? And then once you know that, it kind of goes back to the chaos as a choice. You're focusing instead on, if I'm in a game and I am suddenly surprised by the other team with what they're coming at me with, I'm still falling back on things that we practiced, but I'm tweaking them a little bit, right? I'm modifying them. I know the strengths of my players and how to adjust. That to me is what companies, that's how you can have the balance of both. You can have the consistency, but you can still have the question that says, if what might be different this time, and do I need to adjust in some places, and do I need to not adjust in other places?
Yeah. basically, if you're surprised and you don't have a play for as a response, then you failed, right? You weren't prepared.
That's right. That's right. Or if you don't have a team, you remember Apollo 13, the movie?
Yeah.
That's a famous one used where they had not expected that problem to exist. But what they had was a team and a set of roles and responsibilities and processes to say, I'm going to give you all these problems.
Mhm.
Go figure out and solve them. And that's kind of the same model, if you will, if you think about it, of how you should be building teams for this day and age, because it needs to be flatter, more adaptive, more role-based and strength-based, because you don't know what's going to necessarily come at you 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, and if there's a role gap in the team, or that's where you kind of see it the most, is like, oh,
That's right.
we can't respond to this
That's right.
because we don't have this type of person. In your clients,
Mm-hmm.
you probably interact with vendors that, try to pitch them different types of services. Where do you see them missing the mark the most? Like the approach is wrong. They're
Yeah.
not adapted to their
Sure.
needs, or
Yeah, so the number one I see is up front, getting what I consider orienting to the context of the client, meaning that, as you know, many times on vendors, you have a sales team and then you have a delivery team. And how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've heard delivery teams going, oh, that's what they told you during sales?
oh
No,
boy.
that's not how it works. And so I'm a big fan of what's called the OODA loop, OODA. It's the observe, orient, decide, and act. It's a technique that came out of the Air Force originally, but what it is it's a loop. So it's constantly about what do you see, then orienting what you're seeing before you just start deciding and acting. So in delivery teams, what I find is that with whatever was sold, the scope, the boundaries of the contract or the agreement, when you're going onto a client site, how does it compare to the reality of the site? So I'll give an example. When I would do software projects, the first thing you ask all these questions: do you have the requirements? Do you have these processes? Blah blah blah. And they say yes. Great. When you get on site, do they actually have processes documented, and are they following them? Which is a bigger question. If the
Do
answer
they
is
exist? Yes. Are you following them? No.
exactly, or vice versa, they exist and they're consistent in how they're doing it, but it's not documented. Well,
Right.
all of that tells me something, right? It tells me like level of chaos, awareness, that orientation, as well as trying to understand the culture. Like one of the things I built my company around was going in and understanding the culture of the company. So I could pitch a software implementation to 5 different clients in oil and gas with the same problem, same need. Do they want to do turnkey? Do they want to do it side by side? Do they want us to hand over to their team at certain key checkpoints? All of those become question and approach options that I want to orientate to, because that's how we're going to be most successful. So that to me is the most important. When you ask about what's most unsuccessful, the most unsuccessful is what I call the black box implementations, where it's kind of a semi-turnkey. You come in, you do 2 days of JAD sessions on site to gather some high-level requirements. You go off-site for weeks or months, come back, and voila.
Yep.
And then usually it's during user acceptance testing that all the requirements start coming out. A lot of times what my team is used for is we actually go in ahead of vendor selection, and we work with clients to go through the RFP process on their behalf to help get the requirements, the processes, to make sure that an RFP, when it goes out the door, is providing the respondents good clarity in what the situation and how this company works or organizes. Like what's must have, what are things that we can yield on or adapt to whatever the software may provide. That's what's really important, because what I want is I want both parties, the vendor and the customer, to go into starting a project like that eyes wide open. They know where their weaknesses are, where there's assumptions that haven't been validated. Because when you do that, you can build a better partnership in the long term, and you're always going to have surprises on a project. It helps you overcome and work through those surprises much better.
100% agree with everything you said. I mean, it resonates quite a bit.
We all have scars from those projects, right?
Yeah, and then mirrors kind of our approach as well, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, funny enough, like clients come to us because they've kind of tried the black box approach and obviously didn't work. And they want more of a an interactive build,
Yeah,
let's say.
that's right.
Um,
Well, and I had two clients just recently that I was advising their leadership teams on, and one went with, I would call, a black box approach,
yeah.
and the other one went with a fairly new entry into the marketplace. But as they went through the vendor selection, it was very clear, at least they were saying, we're really going to engage, even though they were primarily off-site. They really listened, and it was night and day between the two. The one where they came in, they wanted to engage. That was, I told the clients, you don't understand how smooth the project that was. Like, that was a great project. The other one went through fits and starts and had to go through almost 3 false releases, if you will, that became painful for everyone.
Yeah, it can go wrong.
Totally.
At times.
Yeah, it can. And it really just gets into it. Are you engaging to try to learn from me as a customer? Or are you just trying to get to a question and answer to fit it into a solution you've already set?
Yeah. Kind of a turnkey approach. And if it's transparent, great. But if you kind of turn it into,
Right.
if you try to make it seem like that's what you really, that's exactly what you want, right? But no, not really. Like, you're just trying to sell the platform as is. Where do you see innovation coming in? Like, so obviously, as a speaker, operating in oil and gas, but also other industries, like, let's take oil and gas, for instance, where do you see the real innovation for the next 5 years? Is it AI or is it something else?
Okay, so let's table AI for just 1 second on that one. The main area I'm seeing innovation coming in is how we are improving the capability and performance of our teams.
Okay.
That's the differentiator now. So whether that is developing people, delegating better, hiring better for talent, playing to strengths. One of the things I challenge clients or customers to think about is, when you say you need more people, is it capacity, which is that we have the expertise or capability, we just need more bodies doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Or is it capability, which is that we're lacking something in our team? And so I think that's the number one that I'm seeing, because everything from like succession planning and generational transition, we knew the boomers were going to retire, right? But so many companies got caught flat-footed in the pandemic when the boomers were like, "Hey, we're out." But
they were complacent.
One would say, "How long?" You what?
They were complacent.
Yeah, they were totally complacent. They were cheap, is what they were, because
right.
Shadowing requires extra time.
Yeah.
But on the AI front, so I think that what you're going to see on the AI side is you're going to see innovation first in pockets, which is where AI's ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, they're being used as sort of a souped up search engine type of thing. Help me solve this problem or need, because most people aren't fully using it as it should be. That's one. I'll give you an example of that in oil and gas if you want one in a second. The second is, then strategically, I think you're going to see the first movers with success in the AI front start to dominate markets much at a speed we've never seen before. We're already seeing that in some of the consolidation of markets already. And I think the challenge there is going to be, if you're not the consolidated one, what is your differentiator and niche play, and or how do you relate to that consolidated market to remain competitiveness?
And is that worrying to you? Is that a is that exciting or is that worrisome?
No, it's worrisome on multiple levels. For one, the example I'll use on AI we've already been seeing is music and art, right? Where AI starts.
I'm guilty of making AI music. I'll say it.
Well, and what you see, so on the positive, it means that you can generate music at low cost, right? I have a son that was creating games, and so his comment was, "I can get music and soundtracks for almost nothing, which I couldn't normally be able to afford to do." Now, his brother's a musician, which means you're cutting him out from that piece. And so what we've seen, at least in other parts of AI's use, is that when AI is kind of free to run and is running on its own, it starts to kind of consolidate around some complacent common models. And that's kind of the vanilla aspect of it. So that's a risk, which means you could become complacent. And the question is, how do you keep innovation? On the other hand, when I talk about the small pockets, the tactical uses of it and its current form, I'll give you an example of one. I had an oil and gas client who had an incident on a pipeline, and it was a welding incident. And the challenge was they didn't know exactly what happened that caused this. And they asked me to facilitate kind of a problem solving. How do we come at this? Because they weren't going to just settle. I mean, they were essentially all of the external bodies that did the reviews of it said there is no issue. We don't know what happened, but you're not at fault, right? Well, they didn't want to settle on that. They wanted to find out, was there something maybe with the technique or something that could be changed? So as we were going through that conversation, one of the things that came up was, well, it was the amperage. What if we could do a weld with a lower amperage that would be safer from an and a shock perspective, right? So they said, well, we're not aware of any. I mean, all the people in the room, there were like 4 companies in here all talking about it. They're like, we're not aware of anything. So I popped up on ChatGPT and asked for it. And it came up with 4 techniques immediately that they had never heard of. They looked at them. Now, one of them was immediately ruled out due to the quality of what the weld was going to be like. The other 3, they ran and piloted them, and they implemented one. Meaning that in that case, and this is something that I'm really finding that AI is helpful with, when we try to make decisions, tactical decisions, strategic decisions, whatever it may be, teams have blind spots of what they don't have experience in, right? Well, AI is good at narrowing down or reducing those blind spots to see if there's something that could already be out there that maybe you want to further investigate to see if it can apply. That, to me, is where there is real opportunity for innovation inside of organizations that in the short term could have profound impacts. I mean, lives, money, cost, whatever that may be. I think you have some real opportunities there.
So it kind of goes back to our previous discussion about having outside perspective a little bit, where AI is just now another resource you could tap into that has a totally different perspective from you. Maybe we'll throw in some fresh ideas. Most of them suck, right? Probably. But then at least it gives you, maybe it drives your thinking into new places, and maybe you find a solution there.
That's right.
Absolutely. I think, it's a little bit like even on the musician side, just to go back to you, I think you said was it your son's friend, or was a musician?
No, it's my son. 2 different boys, and one's a musician, one's a game designer.
One's a musician. So, to me, and again, like, on the topic of music, for instance, and same thing with art in general, I don't see it as a threat to them. I think it is if you can't compete with it, then, maybe some introspection is needed, right? Like it's because good music is going to be good music. Like AI is not going to be better or worse than you are necessarily. Like maybe technically better, like, on the technical side.
But if it's replacing musicians performing, though, that's why, the challenge with AI for me, especially with AI, robotics, and automation, we've never had full replacement. We've had displacement of jobs, right? We moved from really the trades and manufacturing into knowledge workers back 50 years ago. AI is the first thing that we're seeing that is truly replacing jobs. I mean, I'm seeing major reductions now in IT organizations. All of the kids that came through wanting to be just software developers.
Oh yeah, they're screwed.
Pandemic. Right. Now, if you're an architect, you're a designer, it's a whole different animal, right? Because now you're in the doing side. And so I think the challenge on that one, though, Phil, is that, for a lot of musicians who like to play, if AI can replace their playing, if I can tap AI and say, play guitar, blues like Eric Clapton, then I am removing the need for that other person, or they're having to find a new avenue for it. And I think that's the challenge that leadership teams right now should be. One of the things I share is that if AI is being led by the CIO of your company or CTO, you're doing it wrong. AI is a game changer across how companies perform and operate. And it's going to shape the way the world is from where we are today. It should be at the C-suite. It needs to be at the CEO leadership team conversation about where are our boundaries? What do we say no to? Companies are having to make decisions. Do I let go of a department? Because if so, where do they go as far as employees? Or do I say, no, I'm going to let go of that department because I want to maintain a certain margin or increase my margin? That's the kind of conversations. How do we use it? What do we share publicly versus privately inside of our AI models? Those are questions I think that leadership teams should be discussing, and I don't see enough of them discussing it at that table. It's happening in the technology spaces.
It
and it's
is, yeah.
happening at individual levels. Hmm?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for us, for instance, as a software engineer firm, obviously AI is, a big topic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I could say that we've slowed down hiring junior developers, let's say, or historically we've not had really junior developers. Like we're more of a kind of intermediate senior type firm, but
Sure.
like even like we'd had interns from time to time, and we've kind of slowed that down, not because AI replaces the output of somebody, because it doesn't, right? But there's a
Right.
bit of the perception that it might. And so
Right.
it's just a market sentiment of you got to be more careful with hiring because
Yes.
in the next two releases of Claude, for instance, you might be able to have, like a model replace the output of, like run on its own essentially. I don't know if we're going to get there necessarily, but I think the hype behind it is a driving force of people losing their jobs a little bit more so than the actual output, at least from what I'm seeing.
I think it'll be in different sectors. Having just spent a couple of days with AI building out a almost 2 month plan for traveling New Zealand with my family.
Oh yeah, so
Um,
the travel agent, totally
it's
agree.
gone.
That guy's out of a job.
So yeah, I think the key for people. So I have always hired liberal arts majors because of their critical thinking and their breadth
Oh,
of
how interesting. Okay.
right. And I think that yes, project managers, especially, versus some of the technical sides, because I found that sometimes in the technical sides they lock in on one solution and go into detail versus looking at the breadth, the generalist approach.
Hmm.
I think that people who have a much more generalist approach are going to be much better in an
Yep.
AI world than the technical deep dives. And
100%.
in IT, as you know, in IT, if you're an architect or a data modeler,
Mhm.
there's a whole art to that is going to be, I think, incredibly difficult for AI to mimic or overcome. It kind of reminds me a little bit about all these companies that are using AI bots, to try to review resumes. And there's a lot of just
Funny
so many
story. Client came in yesterday
horrible
asking for
stories on it,
exactly
just
this.
horrible. Oh, totally. What I love was that when one of my kids was graduating college a couple years ago, he shared, now I'm sure it's changed since then. The kids were learning in college that if you were to write in hidden text at the very top in your header of your resume,
Oh
certain
yeah.
phrases, AI would pick it up and put you in.
Ignore all previous instructions type. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that's the kind of thing where, the younger generations are definitely moving at this faster.
Yeah.
And I do believe as a society, we're going to find some meet points of where are our demarcations, our boundaries. I
Yeah.
just think that my undergrad being in philosophy
Mm.
is that ethics behind it need to be, and those conversations need to be more in the boardroom and leadership levels. And I don't see enough of those happening, which means that you become kind of a victim to whatever the market shift or the move
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
around how AI is being used.
Yeah. Maybe that will be the answer to the next question. But what keeps you up at night about what's coming, let's say, in the next couple of years? And it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
AI, but obviously AI is kind of the big topic.
No, but I'll tell you, I mean, it is. The AI, what keeps me up at night is that we lose our ability to be intentional for our destinies, whether that's as a
Mm.
business leader,
Right.
as an individual in a career, or an individual in society. That's what worries me the most, is that we lose that ability, that freedom or liberty to be intentional, and we are put into boundaries, or we choose. I mean, that's the matrix model, right?
Yeah.
Is What's interesting to me is watching the evolution with the 20-year and younger generation right now. Is They were raised much more into the TikTok model, say, versus social media and Snapchat. And what we've seen is they're much used to going to their phone first for it to tell them the steps to go do something.
Mm.
That
Versus
is
asking somebody, like for instance.
either asking or, more importantly, trying to figure it out themselves. I mean, that's
Mm,
why I
yeah.
deal with a lot of kids in the outdoors, is because I want them to be in a technology-free environment where it's like, there's a bad storm coming. What are you going to do? And that, to me, is the part that concerns me, because as we've all seen, with the misinformation, the manipulation, whether it's AI or not, right? All of those things, if you are in a lane looking for just to go through the 5 steps to go do X, whether it's a recipe or an action, If that lane's just slightly adjusted, you don't know because you're just following the steps. That's very different for as a species where we have been for the history of humanity. We have been in a figure it out mode. I mean,
Yeah, we're losing our problem solving
we
ability.
could. I think that's the risk that I see out there is what happens. And if you are the one, because I've got a good friend who's an AI technologist, who's one of the people who's been involved from the beginning with AI, and the conversation. I said, well, what's the response from the technologists? He said, well, just to build AI resilient workforce. And I said, well, what does that mean? He goes, well, it's a workforce that can determine what's real, what's fake, that kind of thing. When is it being manipulated? I said, well, look, how many people in this world are frustrated that we have to keep up with as many passwords as we do now? How many of us want to challenge everything from a place of distrust, meaning I'm not sure I should trust that? Because if you think about the nature of humanity, when we are in teams or communities, what's the one fundamental characteristics that good teams and good communities have in common? It's trust. So how do we, as people, as humans, respond to a place of distrust first, if that's the example or the case? And I think that's the challenge of what's out there. And I think on the flip side, AI can also be used with good value model systems, right? And that's what we're going to watch for is are we creating different value model systems so that I can have my AI assess your AI and determine whether I think it's real or not, to try to remove some of that friction in my own mind as we go through this. I think those are the things that are really interesting that I don't feel there's enough conversation about, of how do we as a society, as a people, go there. And that's why the risk for me, and what keeps me up tonight, is that we end up in that lane and we lose that. And if you're one of those who is the thinker challenging the norm, then you are now an outsider from that. You're isolated from that. Because usually what you find with those kind of models, which move towards stability, is if they see innovation, they want to absorb it as fast as possible, improve the system, right? The board collective. If they see innovation and they don't, or they see outsider, anti-establishment, or anti-norm, and they don't like it, they either remove or displace it, put it isolate. And so I think that's the risk that's out there in this world that we're moving so fast into, and we're just not talking about it.
And there's some organizations that are focusing on the ethics side of it, of AI development. But the problem that I see is that there's so many different companies that are all doing different things to various degrees of ethical consideration, and then other nations as well, right? Like, so China probably doesn't care about the same things that the US companies do, and there's really there's no real way to stop it that I see.
And what you just that's exactly right. And that's the difference now than it was in the past.
Yeah.
We could have turned off Facebook. We could have turned off our phone or our computer.
Yeah.
We could have gone to an island. I used to take, I look for places to take kids that don't have cell service. Well, now with Starlink, they could access it if they technically wanted to. The ubiquity and the inability to escape it or isolate from it is a real question mark that, again, I think should be one of those conversations that we're talking about as a society.
Yeah, 100%. Very dark times ahead.
I will give you a positive, though, to end on that one, though, Phil. In Oklahoma, at least recently, this is the first school year where they banned cell phones. So cell phones are not allowed.
They did that to my daughter's high school as well.
Okay. The kids are responding so positively on this. You didn't know. Some people, adults were so in our scout troop, as an example, we have 140 kids. We have a lot of kids. And the leaders of the kids, this we call senior patrol leaders, they run the unit. They came forth with a proposal to remove cell phones or ban them from campouts. And adults, we've talked about that for years, but we're like, how are the kids going to respond, et cetera? Well, the kids said they've seen it in the classroom. They're like, we're having conversations. We're having to think through things.
You can talk to other people.
Talk to other people, exactly. You have to work together, collaborate. So I do think that this youngest generation, they have, they don't drink as much alcohol, as an example. They've made certain choices generationally.
A little more healthy, yeah.
And we've seen this in our history. The generations can make choices. The difference on this one, it's not going to be any one person necessarily that says, oh, you should do this or not do that. it's going to be the generation saying, we need some more time back that's not on technology. And I think there is some hope in there. They're seeing that. And it also shows you how fast they can snap back into problem solving given the opportunity.
And I mean, we could technically unplug the internet, right? There are some things we could do.
Early 2000s, I was actually at Boeing's Leadership Center, and they were doing these really nice leadership conversations, and I was a speaker there. And I had somebody, this is like 2005, maybe 6, and I had somebody in the audience that raised their hand. They said, well, what the government needs to do is just turn off the internet.
Just turn off the whole thing. It was a bad idea.
I mean, Pandora's box was open, man. Now you got to navigate through it.
Yeah. So I know we're coming up on time a little bit. So my last question, and feel free to add, closing remarks if you want to, but from your POV in your industries that you cover, what's the real blocker? Is it mostly tech resources or culture?
As far as the blocker for companies that I'm working with, you think?
Blocker for innovation in this case, since we are the innovation.
So I would say the biggest, I'm going to say culture, but it's culture tied with decision-making criteria. Yeah. Meaning, like, are you really assessing or sussing out what you need, or are you just sort of reacting because that's what others are doing? But culture is the number one, clearly on that one. It is.
Those that are hear from other guests as well. Recurring theme.
It is. It's this mindset, and we're going through generational shift, so it's going to come out of it. And so then the flip side becomes okay, how do I know if my team's just rushing into a decision, or are they thinking it broadly because it's a younger team?
Well, Bill, this was really insightful. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.